Okay, I'm going to show my process for soldering bullets on wire and show all the tools that I use to do it. So first of all, what are we going to use? We're going to use wire, obviously. This is 18 gauge wire. I've been using 18 gauge wire for the overdrive shift knobs that I've been building for everybody. So that's the first thing. Next up is 0.032 diameter 6040 solder from Radio Shack. Hope you can actually see that. Next up, I've been using one of these handheld stripping guns and find this one to be the most useful for the job. Great action, and it works really well. So I'm really enjoying using that one. I've used this thing for 15 years now. Next up is 100 to 140 watt Weller soldering gun. Love this thing. I've had this thing for 25 years or more. It has a light that comes on when you hit the trigger. It heats up very quickly and can't beat it for the power. You need lots of power to heat these things up and make them work. And then finally, the bullets. So I've been getting these from British Wiring. I think that's who I've been getting them from. I buy them 50 at a time, and I've used those. I don't really like the crimp-on style. That's the crimp-on style there. I really like the solder-on style a lot better. So that's the ones I've been using. Most important thing, block of wood. Use a piece of hardwood. This is actually a scrap that I couldn't use to turn a shift knob. And what I've done here is I've drilled a hole in it. And this is what we're going to use to hold the bullet still to be able to solder it up. And so you can see we've drilled some holes in it. You can see I drilled a couple that were too deep. But there's a hole here that's just right. And you can see there's a little bit of the bullet sticking up. That's going to be what we use to hold the bullet still while we solder in the wire. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and get these things soldered up. So the first thing we need to do is strip the wire. For soldering on bullets, I strip off about 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to get my wire here, put my tool on, and strip off about 1/4 of an inch. I do that one, and I'm going to do that one. Got those done. I'll set those to the side. Clear off my area here. I've got my block of wood with my bullet in there. That hole, by the way, in the block is a 3/16 inch hole. That's the right size hole for the bullet. Now, in the threads that I've seen people talk about pre-tinning the wire. So that is step one. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this wire to lay up here, and I'm going to take my solder, and I'm going to take my iron, and I'm going to hold it down. And the thing I find is most important is a lot of pressure. I'm going to get that iron heated up. You can see the lights on, and I'm just going to touch the solder to it, and you see it goes in there real quick. And you can see that shiny solder on that piece of wire. That means it's pre-tinned very nicely. Okay. So next up, I'm going to move that out of the way a little bit here. I normally do this in one shot. I just keep the iron on the whole time, but I'm describing it as I go, so I got to stop. Next up, I'm going to put the iron directly against the bullet, and I'm going to turn it on, and I'm going to let it heat up for a second. And I'm just going to touch the solder to the inside of the bullet and see if it melts. It didn't melt there, so it's not hot enough yet. Give it a second more. Alright, it's melting. And it's going to start to pool inside the bullet just a little bit. Now I'm going to take my piece of wire. I'm going to poke it down in there. Hope you can actually see that. I poked it down in there, and I'm going to let it cool. This takes a second. That bullet actually holds a lot of heat, and it holds it for a little while. So we're going to let that bullet cool, and we're going to hold that wire as still as we can. You don't want to move it. If you move that wire, you're going to get a cold joint, and it's not going to be a very solid joint. So it's now, I can tell just by wiggling it that that joint is hard. Now I've got a nice solid bullet soldered in there. So now let's do another one. Poke my bullet in here, get another piece of wire, lay the wire up here, and I'm going to try and do this one in one shot. Get my iron hot, let it heat up for a second, and there we go. I got my solder flowing in there, kick that out of the way, iron's hot, touch it to the bullet, and since it's hot already, it's going to melt in pretty quick. I've got a little pool of solder inside the bullet. I'll poke the wire down in there. And for what it's worth, these bullets have just the right size hole for 16 gauge wire, or excuse me, 18 gauge wire to poke down inside. And fit very nicely with a pool of solder around them. And we're going to let that cool for a second. And that's cool enough to pull out. Just pull it right out of the block. Nice, good solder joint. Set that one off the side. Got one more to do here. Bullet in. And the wire up here. See if I can get it to lay still. Pre-tin the wire. And I'm putting the solder on the wire, not on the iron. Hot iron against the bullet. Melt a little solder down in there. That bullet's still hot. Even though I took the iron away from it, it's still hot. Poke the wire down the side. Hear a little tension as I push it down in there. Hold it still. Hold it as still as I can. I can feel a little heat traveling up that wire, so now I know I got it hot. And it's solid. Pull it out. Nice solid joint. That's not going to come loose. So there you go. Again, the keys that I find are most important are good clean parts, of course. I'm starting with brand new fresh bullets, brand new out of the bag, brand new fresh wire that I just stripped, a very powerful 140 watt iron, 60/40 solder from Radio Shack, and most importantly this block of wood that allows me to hold the iron very tightly against the wire so that I can get a lot of pressure against the wire and get that heat built into the wire quickly and get that solder against it so I can flow that solder into the wire, and then the same thing with the bullet. And that allows me to get that heat in there, get the solder in there, poke the wire in, let it all cool very quickly, and we're done. Hope you all find that helpful.